This and all talks at the 2019 JavaScript for WordPress Conference are brought to you in part by our sponsors Pantheon, a high-performance hosting platform with agile developer tools. Check them out at pantheon.io. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are continuing on with our JavaScript for WordPress conference here. We are in the headless track talking about how to use WordPress in a headless environment. We have two wonderful people who I have enjoyed to get to know for a little bit leading up to the conference. We have Reyes and Luis who work over at Frontity, one of our sponsors. And Reyes is in charge of communications. And as she shared, you can find her writing blog posts, helping community, and I think enjoying nature away from computers as well, too, if I'm not mistaken. And Luis is in charge of development. So hit him with all your super nerdy questions about how all this works. If you saw Anna before present on Frontity and there were questions of, can it do this or how does it do this? You're looking at the folks building it, folks. So we're excited for this. Now, their talk specifically is going to get into SEO for Headless WordPress, which is one of the most important conversations out there. And I really was looking for this talk specifically and very glad that they stepped forward to do this. So without further ado, I've got both of you up on screen here. Luis, Reyes, say hi, say howdy to folks, and then I'll pull up your slides and let you get going.
Okay, thanks, Mac.
Hi there. Thanks for having us. Our presentation is about SEO for Headless WordPress themes. My name is Reyes, and I work in communications at Frontity.
I'm Luis, and I'm founder and lead developer at Frontity.
And if you're watching this talk, I guess probably you all know what Headless WordPress is, but I think it's important if we start by explaining this concept, as it will help us understand what comes later. So, what is Headless CMS? I think these illustrations explain this concept quite well. On the left, you can see the traditional CMS, which is a database-driven structure where the front and back-end functionalities are deeply coupled. And it can only push content to web-based applications. And on the contrary, on the right side, we have the headless CMS architecture, which is sometimes also referred to as decoupled. And this is API-driven and comes without a front-end out of the box. By decoupling the front-end from the back-end functionalities, you can manage both separately. So a headless CMS allows you, on the one hand, to push content to different channels and devices at the same time. For example, a wearable device or a website or anything connected via Internet of Things. And on the other hand, it allows to use different technologies for the applications that consume the data via API and display that content. For example, this headless approach makes it possible in WordPress to use JavaScript instead of PHP for your theme. And now you may think, okay, I can already include JavaScript files in PHP, right? Well, yes, but we're talking about here about JavaScript UI libraries like React or Vue. And there is one thing you can't do in PHP, which is server-side rendering for JavaScript. But don't worry, Luis is going to explain that later. In any case, as you know, WordPress was not initially intended to be a headless CMS, but in 2016, with the merge of the REST API into Core, everything was easier to build headless WordPress themes with JavaScript. And since then, it looks like WordPress development has shifted in that direction because of the flexibility of these headless solutions. Okay, so in this slide, we can see a typical headless WordPress installation. On the right, you can see that visitors go site.com, and that's a node server running React. Data from WordPress is retrieved using the REST API. And on the left, content creators go to the WordPress dashboard to add or modify content. And that's a separate PHP server running WordPress. Okay, so apart from the flexibility of a headless architecture, a WordPress theme built with JavaScript has many benefits. The first of them is performance. Performance is really important, and a headless WordPress theme can be optimized to get the best possible performance and improve your website's speed. A fast website, as you all know, is important for search engine optimization, as page speed is a ranking factor for Google searches, but for the user experience as well. I think no one likes to stare at an empty screen for more than 3 seconds, right? That's why pages with longer load times usually have higher bounce rates, lower average time of page, and they have been shown to negatively affect conversions. So, conclusion, performance is key. Is a key factor to make sure users come back to your website and engage with your content. The second benefit is that this approach sets developers free from the structures of the backend and allows them to use modern UI libraries like React or Vue for their frontend. And these are also becoming essential to rich user experiences. In addition, by building a headless WordPress theme, the frontend is more scalable and the backend can be locked down to improve security. And lastly, a headless WordPress theme is future-proof as integrates easily with new technology and devices. Okay, now we have seen what a headless CMS is, and we have seen the benefits of building a headless WordPress themes, but what happens with the SEO? Okay, the traditional CMS platforms like WordPress, they work well with today's SEO because they are mainly HTML-based. Search crawlers or spiders were designed for crawling through HTML. Also, these platforms have made it easier to optimize a website by installing a number of plugins which tell you how SEO-friendly your web page is. But with a headless CMS, since it's a backend-only solution, you don't have this standard SEO functionality that you typically get with a traditional CMS. For example, meta tags are not automatically output, so you would need to do this process manually. This all means that with WordPress as a headless CMS, you need to do some additional development to implement SEO. But don't worry, there is good news too. And first, the most traditional SEO rules don't change. Things like keyword research, link building, or regular posting for high-quality content, they all still apply. And second, if you are building a headless theme, don't give up because of the SEO. I mean, there are challenges, of course, but there are also solutions. And there are a lot of things that can be implemented to keep your SEO up. So now we are going to talk about all of that.
Okay, so there are 3 important challenges to keep in mind when developing a headless WordPress theme. We're going to see each of them in detail. The first one is JavaScript and server-side rendering. Okay, so how does Google index your site? You've probably heard that Google now is able to render JavaScript, right? Okay, yes, but no. Let me explain that. This is the normal crawler that's been around for decades. It only understands HTML and is pretty fast. A while ago, Google introduced a new renderer, which is also capable of rendering JavaScript, but it's still slow and expensive, so they don't use it very often. That means that it might take like several weeks to get to your site. So long story short, if you're serious about SEO, you cannot rely on JavaScript renderer yet. You still need a valid HTML. So what's the problem with JavaScript themes? Let's start from the beginning. This is a normal PHP server containing a PHP theme. Okay, so the PHP server is able to run PHP, and it's able to generate an HTML file. It sends it to the browser understands both HTML and JavaScript, so everything is fine and Google is happy. So now, what happens when we want to generate our themes with JavaScript libraries like React or Vue? Our PHP server is not able to run JavaScript, so it's not able to generate an HTML file. All it can do is send an empty HTML and the JavaScript files. Now, the browser receives an empty HTML, okay, that's bad, but it understands JavaScript. So it's able to run the JavaScript files and show the user the final HTML. So not that bad. So this approach works, but it's not ideal because you're sending an empty HTML, and that's bad for SEO and not as good for the user experience either. So, okay, if our rendering logic is now in JavaScript, we need to use a JavaScript server like Node.js. Now, this server is able to run JavaScript, create the HTML files, and send them to the browser. So everything works fine again, and Google is happy again. But before we move on, let's explain this further from the perspective of the servers, okay? And the concepts of server-side rendering and client-side rendering. Okay, first, let's see how a static server looks like. This is the simplest server possible. They have one HTML file stored for each URL of your site. So it's fast, but you probably want to use a CDN anyway to be as close as possible to the end user. Okay, and here what happens when the HTML gets to the browser? Well, it's HTML, so it works fine, so nothing fancy here. But this approach has two drawbacks. First, when the user navigates through your site, it needs to start the process all over again, like throw away the DOM, white screen again, wait for the new HTML, and finally render the new page. And second, it doesn't work well with dynamic content stored in a database. So to solve that, somebody said, hey, let's improve this. And they invented server-side rendering. Here, instead of HTML files, we have code. We have code in the server, logic that gets data from a database and generates an HTML for each URL. Of course, this is slower than serving static files, but if you add a CDN, it is as fast as the static server. So it works great for dynamic content, but the process still has to start all over again each time the users want to visit a new URL. So to solve that, again, somebody came and said, hey, we want websites to be like native apps. So all the logic must be downloaded and executed in the client. No server code, only client code. And what's the only language browsers can run? Okay, that's JavaScript. So they invented client-side rendering. With that, the JavaScript UI libraries like React or Vue. As we have seen, it has a major drawback because the HTML file is empty, and that's bad for SEO. But when the JavaScript takes control of the page, it's good because it feels like a native app, and users are able to navigate inside the app without having to reach the server ever again, only fetch the needed data using APIs. So the user experience is great. So finally, can do we both server-side rendering and client-side rendering? Okay, it turns out, yes, we can. The only thing we need is, well, a JavaScript server. But it works great with dynamic content. And again, if we use a CDN, it is as fast as serving static files. And here it has all the content in the HTML, so Google is happy again. And once JavaScript takes control of the page, it feels like a native app. So mission accomplished. Well, no, you probably you probably are now like, oh my God, this is like super complicated stuff. Okay, don't worry. We can use JavaScript frameworks for that. They take care of all of this. Let's meet them. First, let's start with Gatsby. Gatsby is a bit special because it's a static site generator, and it works with a data query language called GraphQL. It's great because you end up with a static server, which is cheap, but it has a drawback that you need to recreate all the HTML files each time you update content in WordPress. It's not focused on WordPress per se, but they have great support for WordPress using their GraphQL language. Next is a server-side rendering solution. Technically, they also have static exports, but there's no easy solution to use that with the dynamic content of WordPress, so let's call it server-side rendering. It doesn't have anything specific for WordPress, but you can connect manually using the REST API. Oh, and it's great because it works with serverless, which is a kind of super cheap JavaScript server that turns itself on and off automatically. It's probably not as cheap as a static server, but super cheap. Frontity, Frontity does server-side rendering as well, works with serverless as well. And the main difference is that it's focused only on WordPress, so everything regarding WordPress kind of works out of the box. And finally, Next, which is very, very similar to Next, but made for Vue instead of React. So if you want to use Vue, you can use Next.
Okay, the next challenge we are going to talk about is search engine requirements. As part of these requirements, we have included metadata, robots, TXT, and sitemaps. And let's start with metadata, which is one of the most important practices to optimize your site for SEO. Metadata is all the information about a page that you send to a search engine, and it is not visible to your visitors. However, not all metadata is relevant for SEO, so now we're only going to focus on those elements that can influence your rankings. For example, those meta tags that go inside the head section of your site. Okay, so the first one is the meta title. This is the main title of your page and one of the most important elements for SEO. Titles are the first piece of information that we'll see and use them for deciding whether a page is relevant to our query. So again, they are quite important. And always remember to keep them short and descriptive, as people can use different devices to your website. So don't forget about it. The next one is meta description. This is a short description of the page and can be displayed below the title in Google's search results. But sometimes Google prefers to display another snippet from your page to match a specific search query. Don't worry about that. I mean, this doesn't mean that you should forget about this. This is another important element. And the next one is canonical URL. When multiple pages have similar content, search engines consider them duplicate versions of the same page. So you should always use this element to prevent duplicate content and point Google to the original source of that content, or tell the search engine which version to crawl. And the last one is social metadata. This allows to control the way your articles or pages are shared on social media networks by defining how titles or descriptions and more appear in social streams. So platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, or Pinterest use a protocol called Open Graph created by Facebook for social share preview, while Twitter has its own meta tags. They are similar to the Open Graph protocol, but instead of the OG prefix, they use the Twitter prefix. There are a lot of Open Graph and Twitter meta tags, but you don't have to use them all. In this slide, you can see the basic ones that you should always keep in mind. You can see the title, description, type, or on Twitter card, the image, and the URL. And in the links below, you can find the complete list of all the Open Graph and Twitter meta tags if you want to know more about them.
Okay, so how do we add metadata manually? In Next, Frontity, and Gatsby, you do it inside of React with a component called head or helmet in the case of Gatsby. And it's very simple. You can add that component wherever you want in your app, and it moves wherever you put inside to the head tag of your HTML. And in Next, you have to use their head method with an array of the meta you want to include. That's simple. In case you want to use Yoast, you need to install an additional plugin called WordPress API Yoast Meta. We'll post the link to that. And metadata from Yoast is exposed in the REST API. In Gatsby and Next, you can use the same head component and add it manually. And in Frontity, you can use the Frontity Yoast package, and everything is added automatically for you. And in Next, you just use the same head method again.
Okay, the next requirement is robots.txt. This file is one way of telling a search engine where it can or where it can't go on your website. Or in other words, which URLs on that site it is allowed to index.
So adding robots, again, in Gatsby, you can use their Gatsby Robots plugin. In Frontity, a robots file is added by default, and we are preparing a package to configure it further. And in Next and Next, you need to create a robots file and put it in the public or static folder. So adding robots is kind of pretty simple.
And the third requirement we have mentioned here is sitemaps, which sitemaps are another important requirement because they help search engines to easily understand your website structure while crawling it.
So Gatsby has good support for sitemaps with their Gatsby sitemap plugin. In Frontity, what we want to do is we want to make use of the WordPress sitemap plugins. And actually, there is a conversation going on about to include the sitemaps in the WordPress core. So we will release a package for sitemaps taking into account all these scenarios. And in Next or Next, as far as I know, there's no simple way to generate a dynamic sitemap like this. So you will have to create one yourself.
Okay, so we have seen the first challenge, which was JavaScript and server-side rendering, then the search engine requirements, and now let's see the last challenge that we're going to talk about, that is the performance metrics. As I previously mentioned, performance is very important, not only for search engine optimization, but for the user experience as well. And after the blank screen comes, we can see that one of the most important performance metrics is the first contentful paint. And this is triggered when any content from the DOM is painted. And this can be a text, an image, or a canvas render. This metric is quite important for users because it provides feedback that the page is actually loading. The next metric is the first meaningful paint, and this is the time when the primary content of a page appears on the screen. And definitions of primary content differ depending on pages. For example, for blog articles, it would be the headline plus the above text, above the full text. But if an image is critical to your page, for example, if you have an e-commerce product page, then the first meaningful paint requires that image to be visible. This is going to be our primary metric for the user perceived loading experience. And the last metric is the time to interactive. This metric measures how long it takes a page to become interactive, or in other words, when the users get the real thing and can start using it.
So, okay, first, technically, the first meaningful paint is the time between the moment a user enters the URL of your site or clicks on a link that points to your site, and the moment that the browser renders that HTML. So if you do proper server-side rendering, your contentful and meaningful times should be pretty similar. There are two things you can do to improve them. The first one is use a CDN to serve your HTML files as fast as possible. That's a must. And second, make sure your HTML is ready for render. Okay. Okay, what do we mean with that? First, use server-side rendering to generate proper HTML files. I hope that's clear now after this talk, and maybe many more in the same track. Next, for CSS, you may want to use a library like Emotion or Style Components, because they put all the CSS in the head tag of your HTML files, so the browser doesn't need to download any additional CSS file. Okay, you may say, well, that sounds kind of tricky, but that's what Google itself is doing in their own Google AMP format. So believe me, it works and it's really fast. For fonts, just try to avoid them as much as possible. And if you absolutely can't, use font display swap so you don't block the HTML render. And last but not least, make sure you always load your JavaScript asynchronously, okay, using the async tag, and again, so you don't block the render. For time to interactive is the time between the moment the browser renders the HTML and the moment the browser finishes the execution of JavaScript. Okay, so in order to improve that, the most important thing you can do is to reduce the JavaScript bundle size. Okay, what techniques can we use to reduce the bundle size? First, remove all the unused modules. Okay, I'll show you later how you can inspect your modules. Second, make sure tree shaking is active in your framework. Okay, tree shaking is a new technique that removes unused code when you create your JavaScript bundle. It works automatically, but it must be supported by your framework. And third, you should ship different code for new browsers that support ES6, which is like the modern JavaScript, because the code that works in all browsers is bigger due to transpilations and all the polyfills it needs. Okay, that should be also supported by your framework, not something you have to do. And finally, code splitting. Okay, code splitting means that instead of sending the same JavaScript bundle to all the URLs, okay, we're going to split our JavaScript in smaller chunks. And we are going to send only what's necessary. So for example, if we are in the homepage, we only send the JavaScript needed for the homepage. And if we are in a post, we only send the JavaScript needed for the posts. Then once everything is loaded, if the user navigates to other parts of the site, you can load that code. Actually, you can even prefetch that code if you think that a user is likely to move to another part of the site. So again, this looks like super complicated, but all these tools are included in the main frameworks with APIs that are easy to use and easy to understand. Okay, finally, there's another thing coming that we believe it will help with time to interactive, which is React Concurrent. Right now, the current React, called React Sync, does its rendering in a single chunk, okay? But React Concurrent divides the work in smaller chunks, so they never block the CPU. The React team has been working on this for a while now, like more than a year, or I think maybe 2 years. And I think it's going to be released later this year. It was scheduled for for the second quarter, but it's not here, so maybe this summer or later this summer. Okay, and of course, I'm sure that you will eventually get something like this too. Finally, some useful tools to take a look at all these. First, to analyze the metrics. These metrics come from a Google tool called Lighthouse, and you can see them in your browser using Chrome Audit or using 2 Google websites, PageSpeed Insights, that used to have their own metrics, and now it's integrated with Lighthouse, and in a new website made by Google as well called web.dev. Let's see how it looks in the browser. So let's load the website. Is this working? Okay, it's usually the last tab in your inspector, and you just run the audits. It takes a while. It does some work. Checks many things, I suppose. And after that, you get scores, okay? And you get these metrics that you should take a look. First contentful paint, first meaningful paint. Speed index is very similar to this as well. As you can see here, the first contentful paint and first meaningful paint are the same. And then you have first CPU idle and time to interactive, which are very similar, and also related is estimated input latency. Here you also have like more kind of tips or how to improve things to keep optimizing your site, and you also have accessibility and best practices and other SEO scores. Okay, another thing we can do is here it's a bit hidden, but Google has this coverage tool, okay? If you load that and you load the screen, you can see the amount of code of each JavaScript file that's used. If you navigate through your site, it should kind of be reducing because you're using different things, okay? So you navigate your site for a while, and then you can take a look at the code. And here, if you see like, this is like manual inspection. And if you see smaller chunks of red, that's okay. That's probably some conditionals that you won't probably be able to optimize. But the important thing here is when you see like bigger chunks of red here in the line, that's probably modules that are included that are not used. And you can or either remove them or either use code splitting to move them only to the URLs that have that need that code. Okay. What else? Webpack Analyzer. This is the Webpack Analyzer of a Frontity bundle. Okay. So here you can see all your modules. The biggest one is React DOM, which is needed for React, of course. Then we have other libraries like Emotion, React Helmet, Frontity itself, some other stuff. Here you have what is the main application. And here the thing is you have to search for packages that are not used. Like if you don't know something, for example, this is schedule, you don't know what that is, you search for that, you find out that it's actually used by React itself. So it's okay, you need that. But you can discover many things taking a look at this type of graphs. Okay, and another cool thing is Bundle phobia. Here you can see how much each bundle you use weights. Okay, so for example, Frontity Connect, which is the state manager of Frontity, is only 9 kilobytes. That's great. And sometimes you discover things like, for example, humanize string. Humanize string, this library, you want to humanize the strings, like add, go from camel case and so on to kind of human readable strings. If you include this library, this is 75 kilobytes. If we get to the, if you get to Frontity, you can see that the main Frontity JavaScript is 82 kilobytes. So it's almost like all the Frontity core. But if you look for another libraries, you can say that an alternative library that does very much the same weighs only less than 1 kilobyte. So you need to take a look at everything that you are including and be like very careful with all the kilobytes, okay? So, thank you all. I think we've gone a bit fast.
Yeah,
and
probably.
we finished kind of early, but we have time for questions.
Yep.
Okay, the first one, how does client-side rendering of content work on accessibility devices, screen readers? Okay, this is a good question. Accessibility can be tough, but you have many tools to help. For example, here you can see that you're ranking 100 on accessibility, and there are some accessibility recommendations made by Google. Okay, so you can take a look that all this is in order. There are other tools called React X, okay, that you can include in your code, and this tells you in the console log many things, because you can see here you can get 100 here and still not be like super accessible. Okay, so React X is really good to know that you're doing things right. And finally, we really like, for example, this solution. This is a framework for React to build accessible UIs. Okay, you can use this kit on top of any of the frameworks. Okay, and it has components like super prepared for accessibility and compatible with the way area, okay, standard. So you can do it yourself, of course, but you have tools for not only for like ensuring that you are doing the things right, but also to make your life easier. The second question is, can you not use WordPress for sitemaps and copy them over and changing the URL? Yes, yes. That's something we are exploring right now, and that's something we want to do. That's the solution we think is going to work best, like reusing these sitemaps that the plugins are creating, even more if WordPress itself ends up integrating the sitemaps into the core. So yes, we don't want to replicate that work. We want to use what WordPress is already doing, and other times it can even it can be configured in the WordPress dashboard. So that's very convenient.
Mm-hmm. And there's one more.
Okay.
Is Frontity able to reuse any of the styling or maybe even code of Gutenberg blogs? I think that's one is for you as well.
Okay. Yes, there's CSS like like a standard CSS for Gutenberg that you can include. We thought we could release that as a package, so you just include the package and all the CSS of Gutenberg. The standard CSS is included, and you can include any other CSS that you want using emotion in Frontity. Frontity uses emotion for CSS, and Frontity already has something called HTML to React. Okay, so when you get the content of WordPress from the REST API, even when it's created with Gutenberg, it's still HTML. Okay, so it's like that part of the theme. It's out of the React world. So we made like a tool to translate those HTML nodes to React nodes. And with that, you can say, for example, hey, if there is a Gutenberg image, for example, I want to use this React component, or I want to apply this CSS. So yes, absolutely.
And there's one more in the chat. I'm not sure if I wasn't clear enough about one of the benefits of the Headless WordPress theme. So David, I think he was asking like more future-proof. What I meant is that by building Headless WordPress theme, as long as the API endpoint is available, it's easy to integrate new devices and technology that are yet to be released. So if you have any more questions, let us know in the chat, or you can also reach out to us in the JavaScript for WordPress Slack.
Yeah. Maybe we in the future we don't even use JavaScript. We use WebAssembly, or we don't even use I don't know, websites anymore. And we want WordPress to survive to that.
And I don't know if, yeah, I think we're all set.
Okay.
All right, well, let me thank you both again. Let's get you back up on screen. Louis, Reyes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this talk. I hope everybody else did as well. And then we're going to share this out even more, because this is really important fundamental stuff you're talking about. And as we transition into more headless, having the right tools and the right knowledge base is so important. So thank you for the awesome work you're doing. Folks, go check out Frontity. They're also a proud sponsor of the JS4WP Conf. We've also got Kinsta and Pantheon, the big ones to thank as well as all of our other sponsors. So thank you both for coming and presenting. We really appreciate it. Folks, reach out to them, follow them on the social media, follow them over on Frontity, go check out that platform and all of that as well. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Ciao. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.